Please join me in welcoming Keren Pybus to the stage. Thank you so much for being with us, Keren.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I feel like I can't talk to the people around there. Hold on.
Just going to move a little.
Just going to angle myself slightly better.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we could start with, you could tell us a little bit about how you got involved in global supply chains and perhaps what we need to know about global supply chains.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much for having me, first of all. I have been in the fashion industry since I went to uni and studied fashion. And then I worked for a long time I was never going to be a buyer. I'm terrible at drawing or design stuff. So I was always on the merchandising sourcing part. And when I moved to Bangladesh, I was really, really challenged by the fact that the money was just all staying either in the worker's pocket or in the retailer's pocket, wasn't getting down to the workers. And yet there was so much opportunity to use the industry as a force for good from a job creation point of view, to create worthwhile, sustainable jobs. And so I'm a strong Christian. I had some time in Bangladesh, and then I moved to South Africa when I had an opportunity to work for Asda in South Africa. But I got a very clear word from God to say, if you want to walk on the water, you've got to get out of the boat. And basically, like, put your money where your mouth is if you really want to do this. So I procrastinated, looked for something that was really scary, couldn't find anything. I was 40, single, living in Bangladesh. You know, I couldn't think of anywhere that was difficult to live in that sense. And then one day I got made redundant. And so for about half an hour, I got a bit upset. And then I was like, oh, okay, God, you wouldn't wait for me to get out the boat, so you pushed me instead. And so I spent the next 6 months looking around Africa as I saw this incredible opportunity to do something different with the industry from a different base. So rather than trying to change an industry in so many of these different countries that had been so inherently burnt by a lot of the things that had happened. Mm-hmm. And so we found an opportunity to do that in an emerging industry in Africa and set out to develop a model that was going to change the way that manufacturing was done at large scale. I definitely didn't want to do it at small scale, kind of high-end luxury. I wanted to do it at mass scale.
So that sounds like the founding of Ethical Apparel Africa. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what that structure is and also about your co-founder.
Yeah, so I've got the textile background, and Paloma, my co-founder, was... she's very, very bright. She's ex-Yale. She's American. Yeah, they're quite bright too, apparently. She brings all the process and that side of things to the business. And so we run it together as a dual leadership. And we started by just doing, trying to help factories to be able to manufacture at international standards from a compliance point of view and quality point of view. But without orders, there was nothing that you could do through these factories. So we started getting a lot of orders in, some that I would never, ever go back and do again, like trying to sell fashion into Australia from Ghana, which is just never going to work. And then have developed a model over time that basically says, if you can achieve operational excellence in what you're doing, lowest amount of waste, best usage of your resources that you've got, then you can be profitable in terms of you can attract orders. So you can be cost competitive. If you can be cost competitive, you can attract the international export orders that Ghana needs because there's no retail industry there, biggest importer of secondhand clothing in the world, etc. But then what do you do with those export order profits? Well, actually then if you reinvest those back into your workers, you drive worker satisfaction, you create the best place to work, you go towards living wages, you create something that's really fantastic. That worker satisfaction goes up, which, what a surprise, absenteeism goes down, your labour turnover goes down, so what happens then? Your operational excellence goes back up again, and you continue to be profitable through that. But the key thing for us is reinvesting that into the people.
Yeah, I know when we were speaking earlier, I found it really interesting. You talked about like different levels of where factories are, so maybe for our benefit, you could just walk us through. So what is a basic factory like in an emerging market?
So I would categorize factories kind of in sort of 3 levels now, I guess. There are still a lot of factories out there that are at risk of things like Rana Plaza happening to them. There are some really terrible things still happening out there in the industry. Me personally, I would never buy from a market stall or a wholesaler or somewhere you cannot trace where those goods have come from at all. But there's been a lot of really good stuff that's happened in the industry as a result of some terrible tragedies. And so you've got kind of a second tier of factories now, which are what I call the base compliance. So all the big players now, whether you're Primark, whether you're H&M, whether you're Zara, you're M&S, or any of those, will do baseline compliance in their factories. No forced labor, no child labor, freedom of association, making sure everybody's paid the minimum wage, all the basics that you need to function a business in a good way to protect your workers. But for us, that's not enough. We want to go beyond that point. We want to go to that next level. And so the third tier of factories for me are the ones that are really putting workers at the center of what we do. And so in some level, that's things like profit sharing, but at a basic level, that could be not just providing them water to drink during the day, but providing them tankards that they can fill their water buckets from to be able to take home to their family at the end of the day. As a really simple example, healthcare, not just about having a nurse on site, but actually for breast cancer, we did awareness program, and then we screened everybody that wanted to be screened in the factory. And actually out of 350 workers that were in that day, we had found 5 women with issues, and we're now supporting them through that next process.
And I guess one question would be, there must be people in Ghana that would try to do a similar type of factory. Why is it so hard for them to create this themselves?
So we have partner factories that we work with that we don't own, and then there's one factory that we have a majority stake in that we do own, which we use as a learning lab and a model factory for other factories to work with. We're non-competitive in that sense in our approach. But for the African factory owners, one of their biggest challenges is access to finance. So if you try and borrow money to expand your business as an African owner, unless you've got some overseas connections or you happen to find a really great investor that's willing to come, you're going to pay 18% interest, for example, in debt financing. As a British registered business with a Ghanaian branch office, and all of our investors are American, we can access that finance much easier, therefore we can expand quicker.
So what are the plans now? What does the future look like for Ethical Apparel Africa?
Do you know, I was on talking to an investor today, and this is a top tip question for you guys to be thinking about for your future. And he said to me, okay, nothing can grow that fast. If you think you can get to your 20-year goal, nobody gets to their 20-year goal. Everything changes as you go along. What's your base camp goal, but then what is your Everest goal? And how are you doing firstly against your base camp goal? And then really, what is Everest? And he really pushed us on the kind of Everest point. So for us, we are going to export about $4 million worth of goods this year. We want to be at 20 million by 2025 and 100 million by 2030. That will in turn grow to, we've created about 1,000 jobs there so far. We will be aiming to create between 10 and 20,000 jobs by 2030. And it's all about the job creation for us.
And I guess one of the kind of perceptions that people have of emerging markets is that you can't get, you only have low-skilled labor. How are you able to upskill the workforce in order to take on orders in kind of more complex areas?
So every job within our factory has a career ladder. So whether you're the cleaner, whether you're the cutting in charge person, whether you're the HR manager, every single job has a career ladder and a training program that can go with it. So everybody knows that if they want to progress, because not everybody does, then there's a route into which they do it. Everybody then has a personal development plan and a way to do that. And we have a balance of expats working. So I've got 11 different nationalities on my team, speaking 20 different languages, I think, that work within the factories and within the EAA team in Accra and Ghana that do that training. And that can be as simple as we did a 1-hour training session just on buttons last week. It's amazing how complex buttons can be, and if you get the wrong one, it can really ruin something. So, really trying to get into the nuts and bolts of things.
And so, where do you see are kind of the biggest challenges, and how do you get other kind of brands, larger brands, to take note? Are they coming along, or what do you have to do to get them to change?
So we have a nice little sweet spot that's helping us a little bit, which is called the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is a free trade agreement between Africa and the US, which is why we export 99% of our goods to the US, because basically that means that the Americans don't pay duty on goods that I send from Ghana, whereas they pay about 16 to 30% duty on something that's coming from Bangladesh or Cambodia. That gives me the ability to have a lower efficiency factory to start with as we grow, because it gives me the cost buffer to be able to deal with those things. It also gives us the buffer to be able to help other factories and people to invest in those things. Surprisingly, that's the biggest win for the brands that we're dealing with, not the fact that we're ethical. But what we try and do is really push our ethical and sustainable agenda. And you're starting to see it change, and people not just using it because it could be a good marketing tool, but because it's actually the right thing to do. So we've just launched a range with a skiwear brand in the States where every garment will have a tag on it with EAA, Ethical Apparel Africa on it, and a QR code that shows who made those garments. And they are probably the second biggest skiwear brand in the US. So this is not like a small company.
That's amazing. So I know this is a really active audience. They like to get involved. What can a UK consumer do to help you in what you're trying to do in Africa?
That's really interesting because there's nothing you can buy here that I'm making. I think just as consumers, and I know people say this a lot in terms of being aware of what you're purchasing, where you're purchasing it from, and following us, particularly on LinkedIn and seeing what you're doing, talking about it. And if you do come across people that are interested, we've done a Series A, we've done a seed investment round, we've closed the Series A investment round, we'll be doing a Series B investment round in 2023 to hopefully put up another 1 to 2 factories. So, often you find yourself in random conversations with people that you didn't think you could, remember who we are, look us up, and come enjoy the ride.
Well, Keren, thank you so much for telling us what you're doing in Africa. I for one, am glad that, God kicked you out of the boat.
Thank you.
So thank you. Give me a round of applause.